Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Parapelic, today's worship associate. It's nice to see you all. We only have two announcements to share this morning. The first, many of you might know, the town of Winchester is now requiring face coverings for all individuals aged 2 years and above in all indoor public places, houses of worship, or private spaces open to the public, except if someone is unable to wear one due to a medical condition. The next announcement is a video recording from Reverend Heather.
If we haven't met, I am the Reverend Heather Janulis, minister of the Winchester Unitarian Society. As is our practice, I'm on vacation and study leave in July and August. I'm so looking forward to being back with the congregation and beginning another year together. I hope sometime this summer you've been inspired to proclaim what is printed on the t-shirt I'm wearing today. Life is good. I've had a good summer. My dog Temple and I went to Kennebunk, Maine for the first time. Here we are making new friends on the beach. As usual, when I got back, my cat Sheena was very snuggly. You can see I am blessed with a terrific pair of companions. One of our annual rituals is the blessing of the animal service. We usually hold the service outside so our friendly and vaccinated pets can come. Weather and COVID rates willing, we will meet in person outdoors next Sunday on September 5th for this special service at the usual time, 10:30. We especially encourage our youngest friends to attend. This service is a lot of fun. The dogs, cats, and ferrets who attend do not need to wear a mask. However, even though most human adults are both friendly and vaccinated, and we are outdoors, masks will be required to ensure that the unvaccinated are safe. We will have a simple virtual connection set up so people can participate at home. You can access this connection through the very link you used to log on today. After the service, when we can move around a bit and check in with those closest to us, vaccinated attendees can remove their masks to enjoy a refreshing beverage. Water and treats will be provided for the doggos. In advance of the service, please email me photos of either beloved animals you wish to remember or beloved animals who are still with us but best left at home. Please send these photos along with the animal's name to me at the email address on your screen by Friday, September 3rd. I look forward to seeing you there. Before I go, I would like to thank Kai Flannery for again serving as our summer minister. Kai, it is such a gift to be able to step away from the congregation, knowing that the community is in your attentive and caring hands. I've spent some of my leave time creating tokens of our gratitude. Here are the gifts that are soon coming your way. As you know, I recently taken up quilting, and we received 45 pounds of lavender in the spring. So I made a number of large strip quilted sachets. This one is special as it includes custom printed fabric with images of our stained glass. I hope whatever stress you've taken on as our summer ministry falls away with the calming scent of lavender. I also made you a stole. Knowing your connection to Buddhism, the stole includes images of the lotus flower. It is simply made, and if you look even casually, you can find the mistakes, but it's made with love and deep gratitude. And while somewhat plain, there is some vintage bling on the back. A patch on the inside reads, "Given in gratitude to Colleen Kai Flannery for her presence and service with the Winchester Unitarian Society, made by Heather Janulis, Parish Minister, 2021. We are so grateful for you in the many ways you have led and cared for us. I know this is not goodbye, and I'm thankful for our ongoing connection."
That's so great. I'd like to echo Reverend Heather's words. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, Kai. And I hope it continues in some way in the future, and that I get to hug you someday in person. Yeah. Before we begin, I'd like just to remind everyone to check out our latest edition of Highlights, which was emailed to us on August 26th, so you can be aware of all the other wonderful things happening within our congregation. If there are any first-time visitors with us today, please note, as you heard Reverend Heather say, the Services in the summer are led by members of the congregation with support from Kai Flannery. Today, Lee Barton is leading the service. Lee will deliver the second reflection, which he's calling the Perils of Polarization. So now let us open our hearts and minds to the spirit of worship. Looks like we might have a little bit of a glitch. Do you want to try, Tyson, or should I continue?
Apologize. It does not seem that the music is coming through for the rest of the gathering music.
It was beautiful what we got to hear. So hello again. The Winchester Unitarian Society is a welcoming, caring community devoted to spiritual growth, social transformation, and environmental responsibility. Guided by Unitarian-Universalist principles and the diverse traditions of many faiths, we live our values through worship, reflection, connection, and service. Here we welcome all, people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, of all sexual orientations and genders, of all incomes and abilities, of all beliefs, and people with religious questions as well. We know you are here for different reasons: to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, find comfort, and perhaps to find answers to some of your bigger questions. Right after the first reflection today, families with young children will be invited to transition to another Zoom room to visit with Ms. Juanita, our nursery leader, for story time. I will post that link in the chat when it is time. And now we will take a moment to greet one another through the chat function. All news and personal updates are welcomed, happy, sad, and in between. We will be called back to worship through the ringing of the bells at our partner church in Lee.
Marashvashahey, Transylvania.
Thank you.
This morning, our opening words May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. May it be so. And now I will light our chalice with words from Sherry Woodbury. Here we are in our circle again. Here we are at the base of another bridge, beckoning us to cross the chasm one day at a time. Here we are, gathered at the cusp of the future, at the boundary that holds community together. We are here in a circle of love and trust, brought to this moment by a series of choices and promises, by hope and gratitude, by our own shadows faced and befriended. Let us model the health we seek for all and lean into community. Somewhere out there, all we dream is possible. And somewhere in here, we are sowing the seeds. Please join now in singing our opening hymn, Come Sing a Song with Me.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time.
Do you ever wonder what a beloved community is? Do you ever wonder where you belong? Or ask yourself who and what makes a place your place? I think a lot of humans have those same ideas and wonderings. And I kind of wonder if other beings might have those same thoughts and wonderings, even when it might seem a little weird. Maybe like this. At the height of the summer harvest, Tomato rolled in fresh from the fields and over to the farm stand. Tomato stopped for a moment on their way, thinking, who wears mittens in the summer? This guy is everywhere. Rolling around the stranger at a safe distance, Tomato entered the farm stand. Now, first you need to understand that there are two main social groups. In one bin, on one side, we have the fruits, sweet and very popular. And on the other side, in another bin, we have the vegetables. They're a little more misunderstood, and frankly, they're quite often ignored, but they are just as essential for a healthy body. And this is where our tomato rolls in, eager to make some new friends. Tomato, being a thoughtful sort, checks out the situation. Upon seeing a group of similarly roundish produce whose seeds are contained on the inside like their own, Tomato sets off to meet the fruits of the farm stand. "Hi," said Tomato. "I'm new here. Can I hang out with you guys?" "Sure," said Strawberry, with all the other fruits joining in agreement. It appears that the tomato had found new friends who were just like Tomato, or so it seemed at first. Tomato began to notice little things that separated them from their new friends. At first, recognizing that Strawberry actually had seeds on the outside, but also things about Tomato that were different. Tomato had to try a lot harder to display the natural sweetness that came so easily to their friends. And there were a lot of little nutrient differences that seemed minor, but managed to separate Tomato from the others. Meanwhile, Tomato was observing the vegetables on the other side of the stand. At first, the tomato had thought they had nothing in common with vegetables, but as Tomato snuck peeks over at the vegetable bin, they noticed little similarities between themselves and the vegetables. The vegetables had a comparable nutrient density, for example, and many of Tomato's extended family were closer to vegetables than to fruits. So one day, Tomato wandered over to the vegetable side of the stand and said, "Hey, what's going on?" The vegetables were actually kind of awkward, but they welcomed Tomato to their side of the stand. And because of their experience with the fruits, Tomato was fairly cautious at first with their new companions. Tomato was unfamiliar with their general lack of seeds, and especially by their overwhelmingly green color. But then behind the kale and the lettuces, Tomato spotted a familiar hue. The orange of the carrot reminded Tomato of the fruits, the peaches, the apricots. So Tomato struck up a conversation, and eventually Tomato got to know the carrots. And then eventually Tomato got to know all of the different vegetables despite the differences that had initially made Tomato so hesitant. Tomato found they had a lot in common with these vegetables. There were familiar colors, carrots and squashes, and cucumber kept their seeds inside, just like Tomato. Once Tomato arrived, they had been so worried about what made them different from the other produce. But now Tomato saw what they shared with everyone: fruits and vegetables, the entire produce stand. That was where Tomato belonged. That was Tomato's community. Tomato didn't need to be in just one bin or the other, and whatever differences might set produce apart, they were all in the farm stand and all in the produce bins or all on the produce shelves together, or at least until somebody came to buy ingredients for a salad. Each week at this time, we sing a blessing to, from, and with each other. Let's sing it now.
May the light within you shine before you every day. May the light within you shine before you, guide your way, guide your way. May the love we share surround you and chase your fears away.
My gosh. Nice to hear Rebecca's voice, huh? So we celebrate and share our joys and concerns with each other during the summer services. And I think it's a really excellent and special thing, especially at this time. And some of us are getting out to see family, and also in some parts of the country, it's still as dangerous or getting dangerous again to be in contact with others. And so this seemed like a particularly important time during the summer and during COVID to share our concerns, share what's on our heart with our community. Then I have a couple that I would love to share. One is that Chuck and Julie Kewen have become grandparents, which you probably saw in the highlights. So this candle is for Hayden Avery Kewen. Great news. And then one of our candles, I imagine somebody will mention it, but I did want to light a candle for Beth O'Donnell. She has been a longtime member of Winchester Unitarian Society. And in case you were not here last week, Beth died on August 19th with her family and compassionate hospice care surrounding her after a long struggle with cancer. So I'll light this candle, light a candle for Beth. And we've learned that there will be a service and celebration of Beth's life September 25th at 1 p.m. at Winchester Unitarian Society. And they will share the COVID precautions for that service when they're known. And so our community is thinking of her and her husband Ken and Kevin and Katie and all of their extended friends and family. And they invite cards to their home. So if you want to send one, that would be lovely. Thank you. And I've got one more, but I would love to hear from you all. If anybody would like to raise a hand, either virtually or just like that, I can call on you and unmute you. What is on your heart this morning? Yes, Lee.
Yeah, it's been a sad time recently, a lot of deaths. And I wanted to mention one. There was a young man, a friend of mine, Mike Tribuco. We acted together in the Winchester Players, and he died a week ago, Friday, at the age of 56. His health had not been good, but he spent a fair amount of time in the building, and it's just very sad.
Thank you, Lee. I'm so sorry to hear that. Mike Tribuco. A young man. Thank you. Hey, Betsy. Yeah, please go ahead.
Kyle, I'd like to mention the death of a very dear Winchester Unitarian Society member. When I came to Pat Meany and I came to the Winchester Unitarian Church in the year 2000, the first couple that greeted us in the Sims room after the service was Barbara Magnuson and Vern Blodgett. Vern Blodgett served the church as well as Barbara did for many years. Vern was the chair of the standing committee. Barbara served on every committee that I was on just about in those beginning years. Upon retirement, they moved to Hadley, Massachusetts. And for the past year or so, Vern has been struggling with several health issues. And he did pass away last weekend. There was a small private service in New Hampshire. And I know that Barbara would appreciate calls from her Winchester, calls or cards And you can contact me if you don't have either the phone number or the address. But he was a dear, dear man, and we should remember him fondly as one of the good, really good members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. In honor of Vern. And yeah, if you happen to have contact information for Barbara that you'd like to share, if you have an address that you could put in the chat at some point,
I will.
that would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, I think that's one of the neat and beautiful and difficult things about church, is that it's one of those places where we all put our effort in over time. And those are people who kept the fires burning for a long time so that Winchester could be here today. Thank you, Betsy. Martin, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to mention, as I don't know whether it's going to be mentioned in the service, that the death of Chuck Reinhardt, who was our longtime minister and our minister emeritus. Chuck was the minister of the church when Nancy and I joined the church. He was instrumental in bringing us into Unitarian Universalism. And so he was a very, very important influence for us. And he was a minister for many years of the church. And I just wanted to mention the fact that he had passed away on August 9th, I believe, out on the West Coast, and to just mourn his passing.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, I was going to mention him if nobody did, and I'm glad that you did. And I'm very sorry. It's lovely though to hear that he had such an impact of bringing you into the church, you and Nancy and others, I'm sure, at that time. And I've learned that I'm actually going to put a little link to his obit and his memorial service information here in the chat, just so that people have it and can take a note of that if you want to see his obituary. Yeah, it's thank you for sharing that. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about ministry also, is that our lives can be measured in the number of people that we have met and talked to and helped to bring into community together. So thank you, Martin. Oh, yeah, Raymond, Donna.
Good morning, everybody. So I actually got some sad news yesterday. A friend of mine, Rick Warner, who was sort of a magician at healing people through deep tissue massage. I've gone to him for years and years and been trying to reach him for many months. And finally, I sort of went in a different direction and got him on the phone. And he's the first person I know of who had a terrible reaction to the vaccine. And he has a lot of underlying health issues. And when he had his second vaccination shot some months ago, he started having really bad health problems, and he's got heart problems and lung problems now. And I don't know, I'm a believer in the power of prayer. So if anybody else out there prays, you might just add Richard Warner to your list. He's a remarkable man, but for now, he said he's closed his business and he's making candy instead. So anyway, I just wanted to share because it was on my heart.
Thank you, Donna. We'll light a candle and say some prayers for Richard Warner.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love the kind of person who would make candy even when they're home and not feeling very well at all. Our thoughts are with them and with you all. Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to share? Gloria? Yeah? No? Okay, that was just that was an errant finger. Okay.
Hi, can you light a candle for all of the people, all the frightened people in Afghanistan and Kabul, just who are fearing for their lives and trying to figure out how to get out if they are going to get out, and just all of the terror that's happening there.
Yes. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Our hearts are with those folks. And I also read this week that some of the service people in the United States, that there had just been a lot of difficult reactions to everything that had happened. People feeling that they hadn't helped, and it resulted in a higher suicide rate this in past weeks. So that's among service people in the US. So our hearts are with the people of Afghanistan and also with service people, and just lifting up their hearts and their cares and hoping that we can do something to make their lives easier and better right now. Thank you, Stephen. I do know I can put some things in the chat. People probably have their charities that they would prefer or their hopes, but UUSC has been doing some collections for Haiti. And they have longstanding relationships with communities in Haiti. And then there's also Amnesty International has been doing long time work in Afghanistan. And so I can post some of that if people are feeling called to contribute financially. Thank you, Stephen, for lifting. Anybody else? Well, I will light a candle now for the joys and sorrows that remain unexpressed in our hearts at this moment. And friends, let us come into a time with all of these things on our hearts of prayer, meditation, reflection. Oh, ever-present sacred, you reach us in moments of both grief and joy. A still, small voice saying this, here, now. This matters. Pay attention. This is real. Oh, ever-present sacred, we may create space for you to emerge, as in this service this morning. Or you may reach out to us, arresting our gaze and asking us to pause. This matters. Pay attention. This is real. It may be easier to rest in what we know, but you, the ordinary sacred, call us always into learning, into stumbling over our assumptions, being brought into relationship again and again. The small boundaries of ourselves and our own understanding about to be made larger. Like Rumi's chickpea, we jump into the pot. This matters. Pay attention. This is real. Ordinary sacred, when you reach us in moments of paradox, we are often without words. And so we enter into silence together now, holding all that we can of the sacred. But today we grasp or hope for or suspect may lie beneath the surface. This moment matters. Let us pay attention. This is real.
between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to bridges. Will you reach out to divisions? With all of our voices and all of our visions. With all of our voices and all of our visions. With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
In 2004, the Club for Growth, which is a conservative interest group that advocates for lower taxes and deregulation, ran a famous ad against then presidential candidate Howard Dean. In the ad, an older white couple is stopped outside a show with patriotic bunting and asked about Dean's plan to raise taxes. "What do you think?" the man replies. "Well, I think Howard Dean should take his tax hiking, government expanding, latte drinking, sushi eating, Volvo driving, New York Times reading," and then his wife cuts in, "body piercing, Hollywood loving, left-wing freak show back to Vermont, where it belongs." This is an excerpt from author and New York Times columnist Ezra Klein, "Why We're Polarized."
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so I want to talk about politics, but not in the usual way. I'm not going to argue for any particular program or policy. Instead, I want to go meta. I want to step back and look at the big picture, and in particular, at the ultra-polarization of our politics. You know what I mean. Left-wing socialist woke Democrats, racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted Republicans. Not exactly the free and responsible search for truth. How did we get this way? Why is our political discourse so toxic? How does it affect us individually? And what can we as individuals do in response? And here I have to give credit to this book by Ezra Klein, Why We Are Polarized. It came out in early 2020, before the pandemic, before the election and the January 6th insurrection. Still, it's got a lot of good analysis, and I have shamelessly cribbed a lot from it. I want to start by telling you about a truly fascinating psychological experiment. It's about group identity. Okay, what's group identity? Well, group identity means the way a person is identified in terms of the groups they belong to. For example, take me. Sure, I'm a unique individual with unique tastes and feelings and longings and memories and loved ones. Nevertheless, I can also be identified in terms of the groups I belong to. I'm an American, a Unitarian-Universalist. I'm a white heterosexual male. I'm a New York Times reader, and I like sushi. These are some of my group identities. Here's a story about how important group identity can be. A visitor to Northern Ireland was asked, "So, are you a Catholic or a Protestant?" Well, the visitor said that he was an agnostic. Yes, yes, but are you a Catholic agnostic or a Protestant agnostic? As we all know, sadly, people discriminate against each other based on group identity, sometimes with terrifying hostility. Whites versus blacks, Serbs versus Bosnians, Hutus versus Tutsis. Why is this? Why do groups discriminate? Is it conflict over resources, a history of hostility, or is it something more basic? In 1970, the social psychologist Henri Teifel published a paper called Experiments in Group Discrimination, which attempted to answer this question. Teifel and his colleagues recruited a bunch of schoolboys, 64 of them, aged 14 and 15. This took place in Bristol, England. And the boys all went to the same school. They all knew each other. The researchers began by telling the boys that they wanted to test their visual judgment. The boys were shown clusters of dots and asked to estimate how many dots there were. Then their papers were collected and there was a big show of scoring their work. Then the boys were told that the researchers were going to take advantage of their presence by running another test, one completely unrelated to the first. But for simplicity, the boys would be separated into two groups based on whether they had guessed high or low when estimating dots in the previous study. In reality, this is total fiction. The boys were indeed separated into two groups, but the separating was done completely at random. In the new test, each boy had to hand out a limited amount of real money to other boys in the study. They never gave themselves money, just gave it to others. But they could see if the boys getting the money were in their own group or in the other group. Notice how absurd the situation was. 64 boys, all from the same school, were sorted into two groups based on a meaningless characteristic, how accurately they estimated dots, which wasn't even true. Then they were moved to a different study that had nothing at all to do with dots, where they were giving away money, none of which they would ever get. And yet, a significant majority of the boys gave more money to members of their own group than to members of the out group. They weren't told the names of the boys getting the money, only which group they belonged to. When both recipients were of their own group, they chose the fairest option. But when the recipients were of different groups, they made sure that the members of their own group, a boy whose name they didn't even know, got more. And they made sure this happened even if everyone got less in total. They were willing to give their own group member less if that meant they could punish the out-group member more. They had nothing to gain. Sometimes they had something to lose by punishing those whom they believed, based on flimsy and false characterizations, to be different from them. That's how easy it is to create a group identity. Through the lightest of cues, the boys were triggered to see themselves as members of a group, the overestimators or the underestimators, and to discriminate against the other group based upon this group identity. You can actually see this behavior in many settings. Just one example, fans of sports teams. You love the Red Sox and you hate the Yankees. I mean, in reality, these are just businesses. They'll move town. They'll leave from Brooklyn to Los Angeles if the money's right. But nevertheless, this hostility for the other group can get intense. You hear about post-game riots, arrests, injuries. Let me suggest that this is a deep-rooted human instinct that we all carry within ourselves, even though we may not want to admit it. After all, our public morality is universalist. All people are created equal, the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings. And we like to think we're fair and objective. But maybe it's wiser to admit that we do have deep in ourselves this instinct to divide the world into in-group and out-group, us and them. And this instinct makes it easy for us, for anyone, to become partisan and polarized. And that brings us back to American politics. I said at the beginning that our politics today is ultra polarized. Has it always been that way? Actually, no. Let's go back to the 1950s. Like today, there were two national political parties, Democrats and Republicans. But ideologically, the parties were a jumble. If you were a Democrat, you belonged to the party of Adlai Stevenson and Hubert Humphrey, but also to the party of Strom Thurmond and the racist Dixiecrats. If you were a Republican, your party was the party of Robert Taft, Joe McCarthy, and Barry Goldwater, but also Dwight Eisenhower, Earl Warren, and Jacob Javits. People had a great many group identities, just as they do now. They were Republicans and Democrats, but they were also Protestants, Catholics, Jews, black and white, blue collar and white collar, rural and urban, NASCAR fans and opera goers. There was plenty of conflict based on these group identities, but the identities didn't line up. They weren't correlated. You couldn't predict on the basis of one identity what a person's other identities would be. Some issues were political, but a great many were not. And on many issues, there seemed to be either a fairly broad consensus or a fairly broad indifference. What happened? One thing is that the parties, Republicans and Democrats, have become ideologically sorted. Instead of a jumble of ideologies in each party, now the conservatives are in one, the liberals in the other. Here, a key date is 1964. In the spring of that year, Congress passed a Civil Rights Act. As it happened, more Republicans voted for it than Democrats. But that summer, the Republican Party chose as their nominee for president the conservative Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, who had voted against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Immediately, the racist Dixiecrat Senator Strom Thurmond announced that he was leaving the Democratic Party and joining what he called the Goldwater Republican Party. That started a movement. Over the next couple of decades, conservative Southern Democrats, one by one, became conservative Southern Republicans. In 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected president, thereby cementing the hold of conservatives on the party. And by the 1990s, the party was actively purging what they called rhinos, Republicans in name only, Republicans who were deemed insufficiently conservative. So by now, the parties are completely sorted. The leftmost Republican in Congress is to the right of the rightmost Democrat. This was a fateful change. Back in the 1950s, when both parties contained liberals and conservatives, issues had to be settled within the party, more or less quietly. Parties did not want to be seen fighting among themselves. But once the parties got sorted along ideological lines, ideological differences could come out into the open. They were tools with which to attack the other party. And like a powerful magnet that creates a magnetic field and causes all the iron filings in the neighborhood to line up in a well-ordered pattern, so the polarization of the parties has caused other group identities to line up with partisan political identities. On nearly any issue, there's a Republican position and a Democratic position. Remember, this didn't used to be true. Consider abortion. In the 1970s, there were pro-choice Republicans and anti-abortion Democrats. It was a powerful issue, but not a partisan issue. No longer. Another example is national health insurance. In the 1960s, many Republicans voted to establish Medicare, a massive single-payer national health care system for this nation's elderly. But by 2009, Obamacare, a healthcare system based on private insurance, incorporating ideas first advanced by the right-wing Heritage Foundation and subsequently implemented in Massachusetts by Republican Mitt Romney, didn't get a single Republican vote. Even non-political issues get swept up in the polarization. Professional football, what could be less political than that? And yet, one Colin Kaepernick knelt in protest during the national anthem at the start of NFL games. Donald Trump said he should be fired. Democrats defended him, and Republican support for the NFL dropped from 60% to 30%. You can see the same pattern in the campaign ad against Howard Dean that Stephen read earlier. Dean is denounced not just for the usual reasons, tax hikes and government spending, but for latte drinking, sushi eating, Volvo driving, New York Times reading, so on and so on. Is sushi political? Apparently so. And of course, during the past year, we've seen polarization in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Public health measures, mask wearing, vaccination have become politicized with disastrous effect. There are Democratic and Republican positions on the virus, even though the virus itself does not have a political party. For us Unitarian-Universalists, this is really frustrating. We're children of the Enlightenment. We believe that people can be rational and that there is a common good that reasonable people can discern. And this is summed up in our fourth UU principle, the free and responsible search for truth. We think we ought to be able to pursue the truth the way it's done in science, advancing arguments in good faith, testing arguments against facts. But that process depends on a lot of prior agreement. What constitutes a fact? What is a valid argument? It's really hard to have a rational argument when there is so little agreement even on basic facts. Whether vaccines contain microchips, whether violent rioters are actually peaceful tourists, whether climate change is real. In this environment, there are many incentives to deny facts. Wild partisanship is rewarded with electoral popularity and massive political donations. Take Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. She has no committee assignments, and she's compiled a spectacular record of conspiracy mongering and disinformation. And yet in her first 3 months in office, she raised $3.2 million. Demagoguery pays. If you care about public policy, this is frustrating, but it's also bad for our souls, bad for our spiritual health. Remember that as human beings, we are just as susceptible to partisanship, to polarization, to us versus them thinking, as those 64 schoolboys in Henri Teifel's experiment. We can get sucked in. The polarized environment affects us as well as others, and not for our own good. We do not benefit from getting worked up into a frenzy of hostility towards others based on their group identity. It is hard to acknowledge the inherent worth and dignity of people whom we are being primed to hate. This is the real peril of polarization. This, as much as anything, is what we struggle against. We have now arrived at the point of the sermon where, having presented the problem, I am supposed to explain what we can do about it. Frankly, I don't have many answers. Maybe some of you smart folks will join me after the service and share your good ideas and your wisdom. But I'll take a stab at it. The first rule, of course, is the ancient Greek admonition, know thyself. Know how incredibly easy it is to fall into us versus them thinking, and try to catch yourself when you do it. But assuming we can do this, what are we to do when we find ourselves listening to rhetoric we reject, statements that trigger feelings of revulsion, anger, and outrage? Well, I don't think it helps to take the bait. I don't think it helps to get all hot and bothered and launch into an angry counterattack. No matter how mad we get, it doesn't help to answer insult with insult and end up shouting. Another bad response is to retreat into a kind of intellectual ghetto of the like-minded, people who think like ourselves, people with whom we can share atrocity stories and play endless games of, aren't those other people awful? A third unhelpful response is gag rules, declaring certain topics off limits. Extended families sometimes do that, especially at holiday gatherings. I guess it's a way to keep the peace, keep folks from yelling at each other across the mashed potatoes. But at what a cost? The partisan divide is still there, just censored. The elephant is still in the room, and everyone has to work hard pretending it isn't. What might be a better way? Let's distinguish two different situations, public and private. If you're a public figure, an office holder, a leader of an organization with a public face, then I think you do need to speak out. Words matter. Silence implies consent. Plus, a public figure can not only articulate a position, but also model our appropriate behavior, demonstrate what rational truth-seeking argument looks like. But what about when you're in a private context, talking with friends or family in a living room? Well, I'm going to start by recommending something that may seem counterintuitive. Abandon all hope of winning the argument, of persuading people, of changing minds. It might happen. People do change their minds. But when they do, it's generally after a long process of mulling things over, not the result of a single argument. People care about their partisan beliefs. They cling to them. They don't want to let them go and experience the resultant sense of loss. So instead, why not just be curious? We spend so much time talking with people who already agree with us that it's a rare opportunity to listen to someone whose ideas are different. Their ideas, crazy as they may sound, tell us something about who they are, what they care about, what they hope for, what they fear. Of course, we should also be prepared at the right time to state our own position briefly and calmly. It's always good to have an elevator speech ready. But the key thing to my mind, is to be curious about other people. What motivates them? What drives them? Why are their ideas so important to them? We may not learn anything new about the issue, but we might learn something new about other people. All this advice has been somewhat discouraging, so let me finish with something more inspiring. A story from a column by Nicholas Kristof in, yes, the New York Times. Daryl Davis, 63, is a Black musician with an unusual calling. He hangs out with neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan members and chips away at their racism. One of Davis's methods is not to confront antagonists and denounce their bigotry, but rather to start in listening mode. Once people feel they are being listened to, he says, it's easier to plant a seed of doubt. In one case, he listened as a KKK district leader told him that Black people are genetically wired to be violent. Davis acknowledged that many crimes are committed by Black people, but then he noted that almost all well-known serial killers have been white. He mused that white people must have a gene to be serial killers. When the KKK leader sputtered that that was ridiculous, Davis agreed. It's silly to say that white people are predisposed to be serial killers, just as it's ridiculous to say that Black people have crime genes. The man went silent. About 5 months later, he quit the KKK. Let's all think about that.
Thank you, Lee. That's great. The weekly offering is an opportunity of dedication, a time when we live our values through acts of generosity. In this way, the offering is also a spiritual practice, a collective affirmation of our shared values and our commitment to the mission of this liberal religious congregation. Here are the ways you can easily donate to the Winchester Unitarian Society. Through giving online on our website, using the smartphone app called Give Plus, through PayPal, or by mailing a check to the Society at the address on the screen. Please write or type the date of your offering in the memo field or comment field. Our practice is to invite first-time worship attendees to be our guests, so in lieu of a contribution, please consider completing the virtual visitor card so we can stay connected beyond this Sunday. The offering will now be generously given and gratefully received.
It seems we have another audio issue. Apologize for that.
No problem, Tyson. Let's continue. Those who wish to do so are now invited to join in reading together our community affirmation. And Tyson will put that on the screen. Thank you, Tyson. We gather not for ourselves alone, but to use our common power to build the beloved community within and beyond these walls. We create and reaffirm this covenant this day to make justice flourish, to practice compassion amidst difference, and to embody transformative love. And now let us join in singing our closing hymn, Immortal Love.
We do not see a thing until we see its beauty, as Oscar Wilde wrote. He was a connoisseur of both paradox and beauty. It is good to be sure of a thing which needs to change And it is also good to practice our heart of acceptance and care around what is not exactly as we might wish. It is good to fight for the safety of all, and it is good to remember that all includes those we do not understand or those we understand too well. And sometimes we may remind a person of a beauty and belonging they had forgotten. That too may be a gift we can give. May we be open to the gifts that surround us, sometimes in unlikely wrapping. May we offer the gifts we have. And may each of you remember to be cognizant of the gift you are. Thank you for your presence here. Thank you for your presence in the world.
Oh, I was so hoping we would not run into that same bug, but apparently we've been bit.
Well, it was great even to see John's fingers dancing across the keys for a minute, everyone. So we will extinguish the chalice. Let's join in reading together the words we say. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, Kai. Today's service has ended, but our life of service continues. As we acknowledge those who made today's service possible, let us continue our conversation in the chat. And then after a few minutes, we will go into randomly assigned breakout rooms for more conversation, unmuted. Probably after just about 5 minutes. We'll come back into the main room for a conversation with Lee about his wonderful reflection. And I think Dennis Brett, if you can wave, will help facilitate the discussion when we go back into the main breakout room. Thanks, everyone.